Dr Annu Jalais is an environmental anthropologist whose work explores the deep connections between people, animals, and the places they call home. Now an associate professor of anthropology at SIAS Krea University, she has written Forest of Tigers and the Bengal Diaspora, shaped classrooms from Singapore to London, and carried her research through Yale, Leiden, and Paris. Her journey brings together ecology, identity, and the lived stories of South Asia.
Hello and welcome everyone to the very first episode of the Krea Faculty podcast series. We're so glad to have you here with us today as we begin the space for conversations with scholars and educators who shape our academic community. And it's great to have Dr. Annu Jalais as the very first guest of this podcast series. Welcome, Dr. Annu.
Thanks, Sanjana, for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So I want to begin by asking you, you've spent years studying how people relate to animals, forests, and the places they live in. What first drew you into this world of environmental anthropology and what still excites you about it today?
So, I think what brought me to anthropology was when I was 7, my mother was very ill, and we spent some time with some friends, and there was a forest behind their house.
Okay.
And I used to often go and spend time in the nook of a huge big tree, which was next to a stream. And I think that always kept me very close to the environment, to plants, animals, all of that, because I kind of felt that they understood me, you know.
Okay. Interesting.
And what still excites me today is that, you know, somewhere there is, all over the world, there is a love of nature, a love of life, basically. But what I like to find, what is exciting, is how differently different communities have understood their relationship to their environment. And I like to collect the stories from each community, from each place, about that specific, about their environment and how they think about it.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
So for example, in the Sundarban, I wanted to know, how did people think about living with man-eating tigers, And that's why I went there, and I came back with fascinating stories about tigers. And today in our world, which is where the environment is getting increasingly hostile for many people, for many places, how do we keep ourselves relevant by looking at our environment, by still thinking about it? So this is why, I think that it is very important to keep really the environment at the center of our
Absolutely.
research, of our studies.
And that
And teaching.
actually brings me to my second question about your experience in teaching. So you've taught and conducted research across institutions in Singapore, London, Paris, and Yale before coming to India. How have these different experiences shaped the way you teach at Krea, especially when it comes to thinking about the environment and identity?
So I think everywhere students are the same. They come up with very imaginative excuses to not do their work. But what I find important in each place, and the way in which I get students excited about thinking about the environment, is to look at specific issues. So for example, what I realized in Singapore was that there were no crows. It's the only Asian city without any crow.
Okay.
And crows were all exterminated in the 80s. And so I got my students to think about that, to think about why, for example, every time there is a fear of diseases spreading. The first animals that get killed are, crows, cats, all of that. So how does the government think about non-humans, about the environment, and how does it try to control its population by controlling wild animals? So this was what for me was very exciting in Singapore. In India, I try to get students to think about traditional ways or ancient traditions with which various communities in India have understood nature, the environment. So what are these privileged connections, and how do we make sense of these connections, within a modern study system, right? Within relevant books. Within books that are contemporary. How do we understand ancient traditions?
Okay.
So, yeah.
Very interesting. Your recent collaborations, from work on zoonosis to the Southern Collective, bring together artists, scientists, and local communities. What have you enjoyed or learned from working with such a mix of people?
So what I have learned is to look at issues from different perspectives. There isn't just the anthropological perspective. It's interesting to work with historians. I learned a lot working with Joya Chatterjee as to how to look at a society by blending history and anthropology, for example. I learned a lot from Arati Sridhar, who is at the Dakshin Foundation. She started it, and she has been working with fishing communities from southern India. And so, what does she bring to the table? And through her, a lot of community leaders from fishing communities who, are interested in what we are writing about these communities, and who teach us and learn from us. So it has been an experience where there's been a lot of sharing of knowledge. And this is what I feel is fantastic. Knowledge and emotions and ways of looking at the world. I've worked with a lot of artists, and I find it so mind-blowing, to look at things from their perspective. And I think it really forces us to rethink a lot of how we feel about the environment and our world. So I'm very glad to be working on collaborative projects.
Okay, interesting. As an author, what do you enjoy most about turning your field experiences into stories on a page?
So I like to stay honest to the tone in which certain stories were narrated. I remember as a child reading books in English, Indian authors writing in English, that I found jarring. And I think that today authors are a lot keener to stick to different coarse languages depending on the caste, on the community people are speaking from. And when writing in English, I want to keep that tone. I want to keep that language, right. Even if it shocks sometimes my friends from better off backgrounds, and they're like, oh, you can't be writing this, and I'm like, this is what they said, this is how they speak, I'm sorry, it is it is another way of socializing, of looking at the world, and of talking about lives. And I need to be true to the way they spoke about their lives by keeping, the tone, the language the same. So I like doing that.
Okay. From the Sundarbans to the Indian Ocean, is there a story or moment that has stayed with you and continues to shape how you think about people in place?
So 2 days after I arrived in the Sundarban, I found a huge big snake on my bed. Okay. And this was a tiny little hut, a bamboo woven hut, and there was a snake. And so I thought, okay, I'm not going to get hysterical or anything. I called one of the teenagers of the household, and I said, come with a big stick. And I open the doors, show him the snake, and say, and he looks at the snake, laughs, and leaves. And I said, am I supposed to cohabit with this snake? And he said, yes, this is a rat snake, a daral in Bengali. It won't harm you. And if I remove this one, you might get a cobra. So, because every hut has its snake. Okay. So you're lucky, this is only a rat snake. So he said, no, don't worry about it, it'll go. And at night, very often, I used to hear mice in my thatched roof. They would run around, and suddenly I'd hear a and kick. So I knew that my rat snake, my pet I used to call him, had dinner, and all the mice would just turn quiet after that. Okay. And it was very interesting for me, soon after I reached the Sundarban, to learn about the fact that we need to coexist, and that this was only a rat snake and I should learn to live with it. So that for me was an experience that has stayed with me, you know, how to coexist with non-humans, with our environment. Yeah.
It's a very interesting anecdote.
Thanks.
Could you give us a quick overview of your current research and the projects you're working on right now?
So at the moment, I'm working on comparing 10th century China and India in relation to the environment. I'm also working on mental health in the Sundarban. I'm working on Bengali migrants who are in Chennai and other South Indian cities. So this is what I'm working on at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we'll move to a fun segment of this episode, the rapid fire round. Okay, a book outside your field that you recommend to your students all the time.
Okay, outside my field, but not completely outside, would be Rabindranath Tagore's Gora. That I recommend to my students because I want them to learn about 19th century Bengal.
Okay.
Yeah.
A place you return to in your mind when you need inspiration?
Maybe that big tree I spoke about and the little stream. I kind of like imagining myself there.
Okay. One idea you hope every student carries into the world after taking a class with you?
I hope to instill in my students the idea that they have the responsibility as well as the ability to make the world a better place, a more equitable place.
Okay. A non-human being, animal, plant, or landscape you feel you've learned from recently?
So recently I moved into a flat in Chennai from where I can see the sea. And looking at, I had never realized how the sea changes color throughout the day.
Oh.
And it's a symphony of greens and blues and grays, and it's really filled my heart with joy. And I kind of take inspiration from the sea. Yeah, so.
If you could start a dream project tomorrow, what would it focus on?
Okay, so it would be a project to make Indian cities a lot more equitable. So I would open up all the gated communities so that people who are on cycles or walk can pass through them. I would make it prohibitively expensive to own cars. I would make public transport a lot better. I would make sure that the 10% of Indians who currently kind of feel they own public spaces are put back in their place, and that public spaces really be public for everybody. The 90% that very often governments seem to not care enough about. So yeah, I would really want to make the place a lot more equitable. We see that the American system of thinking about society has not worked out. It is one where we are killing ourselves, right? The American system, it's self-imploding. Whereas I feel that Europe or China have ways in which they take in the majority of the people with them. So free healthcare, free education, these are two things that every Indian citizen should have. And I feel that really it is important to think about that, because India is losing out with the brain drain that is happening. And I feel that this is such a beautiful country which has so many resources, and really, if we made the place a lot more equitable, then it would be a better place for everybody. Mm-hmm. So thank you.
We come to the end of this discussion. Thank you so much, Dr. Annu, for being part of this episode. And for those of you listening, stay tuned for more episodes.